Our main character is Yuichi, a second-year student living an otherwise very ordinary school life. Every day, Yuichi wakes up early to deliver newspapers, earning money to cover his living expenses. Today, he pushes himself to work even harder because he needs money for an upcoming school trip next month. Despite the costs, he is determined to go since he and his group of friends have planned the outing together. At school, we meet Yuichi's closest friends. First, there's his blonde-haired friend, Shibe, a wealthy young man who would willingly lend Yuichi money if needed. However, their friend Shiho finds Shibe's attitude overly arrogant and urges him to tone it down. The other two friends, Yutori and Tenji, arrive at class and encourage Shiho to let it go and forgive their clueless friend. Tenji is known for his genius-level intellect and spotless reputation, while Yutori is a quiet girl who has experienced bullying in the past. The five friends share a close bond, and Yuichi wishes things could stay this way forever. However, bad news arrives when the teacher announces that the 2 million yen set aside for the class trip has been stolen. Shiho pleads for the thief to confess rather than disrupt the class's unity. But of course, no thief would willingly come forward. The situation worsens the following day when both Shiho and Shibe fail to show up to school. Since they were responsible for safeguarding the money, their absence raises suspicion, and rumors begin to circulate that they might have stolen the money themselves. That evening, Yuichi suddenly receives a letter from Shiho asking to meet at school. He rushes there, only to find that his 4 friends have also been summoned, each under the pretense that Yuichi had called them. Realizing they've been set up, Yuichi barely has time to process this when he feels an electric shock hit him from behind. As he loses consciousness, he glimpses his friends being abducted. While unconscious, Yuichi recalls lessons from both his teacher and his mother. His teacher always emphasized that money is the most important thing in life, whereas his mother believed that friends were what truly mattered. When Yuichi regains consciousness, he finds himself and his friends locked in a white room. Suddenly, a doll enters the room. Yutori recognizes it as Manabu, a character from an old animated series. Manabu explains that they are now participants in a game. If they succeed, they'll win 2 million yen per round and a total of 20 million yen if they complete the entire game. The money, according to Manabu, is meant to repay a debt. Yuichi dismisses Manabu's claims as nonsense, but the doll reveals that one of Yuichi's friends has accrued a 20 million yen debt. Tenji tries to negotiate, accusing Manabu of kidnapping and lacking evidence. However, Manabu reveals that someone among them paid a 2 million yen deposit to enter this game, implicating one of them as both the thief of the class trip money and the one responsible for their current predicament. Manabu gives them a choice. They can refuse to participate, but the 2 million yen deposit will be lost, and the person in debt will have to repay the full amount alone. If they play, the debt will be evenly distributed among them. Winning will eliminate the debt entirely, but losing will force them to shoulder the entire burden. Manabu allows them time to consider. The group decides not to dwell on identifying the betrayer for now and instead agrees to participate, believing it's their duty as friends to help each other. Yuichi, however, struggles with his thoughts, questioning whether money or friendship is more important. Ultimately, he resolves to prioritize his friends, and they all agree to enter the game. The first game begins with a massive coin and 5 nameplates on a table, each containing the individual debt amounts. Everyone's debt is evenly distributed at 4 million yen. The rules strictly forbid showing others their own debt amount. Violating this rule will double the debt. The game's mechanics are explained. All 5 must place their hands on the coin and move it together to answer a series of questions. If they are unanimous in their decision, the coin will automatically move to the chosen answer. However, if even one person disagrees, the coin will shift to the opposite answer. This game tests their unity and prioritizes the minority's choice over the majority's. Additionally, they are forbidden from speaking unless a question is being read. Breaking this rule will also double the debt. The final rule warns them that the person with the lowest ranking at the end of the game will bear the entire debt. the group is reminded that the key to winning is to work together and maintain their unity. Shibe was chosen to read the first question, "Is Mount Fuji the tallest mountain in Japan?" Everyone knew the answer was yes, but somehow the coin moved to the wrong answer, causing the group to lose their chance to reduce their debt. Shiho tried to speak up, but the others stopped her, fearing she would break the rules. The second question was also an easy one, but yet again, the coin ended up on the wrong answer. This confirmed that there was a traitor among them. Yuichi began to suspect Shibe. A few days ago, Shibe had been punched by Shiho after trying to flirt with her, leading Yuichi to think Shibe might be seeking revenge. Shibe had tried to enlist the group's help to reconcile with Shiho, but everyone ignored him. However, Shiho was no longer upset with Shibe because Yuichi had spoken up on his behalf. Returning to the game, the third question was read, and once more, despite its simplicity, someone sabotaged the answer. By the fourth question, it was Yuichi's turn to read. To his surprise, there was no actual question. The players were required to come up with their own question. However, there was a note beneath the instructions. If the coin landed on yes, the group would win. If it landed on no, the reader would have their debt reduced by half. Yuichi realized why the first three questions had been easy yet sabotaged. Someone had been choosing no intentionally to reduce their debt and shift the burden onto the person with the most debt. At first, Yuichi considered being selfish and choosing no to reduce his own debt. However, he noticed Yutori, who was the last to go, and realized how weak and vulnerable she was. Knowing she wouldn't be able to shoulder the entire burden, Yuichi decided to select the correct answer to help the group move forward. Yet, even then, someone still chose no. Yuichi realized that someone in the group was deliberately trying to pile the debt onto Yutori. This was particularly troubling because the final question had no condition allowing for debt reduction like the previous four questions. When it was Yutori's turn, she asked the group a heartfelt question. Will we all remain friends? The observers noted that this question should have come first because, at the start, the answer would undoubtedly have been yes. However, given the current circumstances and growing distrust among the group, the majority answer was now likely to be no. Yuichi, fearing the emotional impact this would have on Yutori, decided to break the rules by speaking out. This doubled his own debt, but he did it to ensure that Yutori would not be the one to bear the burden alone. Yuichi accused the group of trying to shift all the debt onto Yutori, claiming that the true rule was that the person with the least debt would lose. While the group suspected he might be lying, none dared to take the risk of speaking up and becoming the next target. Yuichi's calculated move forced everyone to vote yes, ensuring they passed the round. Despite this success, everyone noted that their individual debts had only been reduced by 400,000 yen. Yuichi also believed his debt remained the same, as he had both halved his debt using the note and doubled it again by breaking the rules. Manabu urged the group to move on to the second game. However, Yuichi stayed behind for a moment to inspect the questions and notes from the first game, only to find that the notes had disappeared. Shiho returned to find Yuichi and discuss the possibility of a traitor within the group. Yuichi suspected Shiho as she was disciplined and methodical, making it unlikely she would willingly participate in the game instead of investigating the culprit who had stolen the money. However, Shiho revealed her suspicion of Yuichi, citing his financial struggles as a potential motive. Shiho admitted that she hadn't accused Yuichi because she didn't pity him, she deeply cared about him. She also confessed that her debt had doubled because she had accidentally made a sound after answering the first question incorrectly, resulting in a penalty. She believed Yuichi had broken the rules to save her, as at that moment, she had the highest debt. Their conversation was overheard by Tenji. The organizers observed that Yuichi was sharp and resourceful when it came to matters of money. His keen instincts and clever strategies were impressive, but they doubted it would be enough to win the game. After all, someone among the group was actively working to destroy their friendship. The group then moved on to the second game. They were told that this round would be watched by an audience from above, and the game required the players to insult their friends. The rules seemed confusing, so Manabu clarified. Each player would take turns entering a room to write something bad about one of their friends on a piece of paper and put it in a box. Manabu would then read the insults aloud, and the audience would vote on who should move the most spaces on the board. The first person to reach the finish line would shoulder all the debt and move on, while the remaining 4 would be eliminated. However, there was a loophole. If everyone submitted blank votes, each player would only move 1 space forward, potentially allowing them to reach the finish line together and proceed to the 3rd round. Manabu warned, though, that a traitor was almost certain to submit something, making the blank vote strategy risky. The 2 observers laughed, doubting the group could work together. Humans, they believed, were inherently selfish, and they were curious to see how far the group could go together. In the first 2 rounds, everyone submitted blank votes, and the group advanced 2 spaces. However, each space on the board came with conditions that added more debt to their totals. Manabu then introduced a new rule. All the accumulated debt from these conditions would be transferred to the person who reached the finish line first. From the 3rd round onward, things began to unravel. Someone submitted an insult targeting Shiho, revealing that she had feelings for Yuichi despite having previously dated Tenji. According to the observers, romantic entanglements were the most effective way to destroy friendships. As a result, Shiho was forced to move 5 spaces forward, while the others moved only 1. Shibe accused Yuichi of toying with him, knowing full well that Shiho liked him, but keeping it a secret. Tenji scolded Shibe for being jealous, reminding him that he was Shiho's ex-boyfriend. However, Shiho explained that her relationship with Tenji had been arranged by their fathers, who were old friends, and that she had no romantic feelings for him. While her claim made it seem like a lie, Tenji truly had feelings for her, which fueled his frustration when Shibe spoke disrespectfully about her. The argument escalated, with Shibe and Tenji turning on each other, each suspecting the other of being the one to write the insult about Shiho. Tenji used his sharp mind to pin the blame on Shibe, accusing him of spreading rumors about the love triangle to confirm the truth. Tenji argued that he couldn't have written it himself because doing so would only make him a suspect. Before the situation could devolve into violence, Yuichi intervened, advising them to focus on Shiho's feelings if they truly cared about her. Meanwhile, Yutori grew envious, lamenting that all 3 boys seemed more interested in Shiho than her. In the next round, things took a darker turn. 3 insults were submitted, the most damaging of which revealed that Shiho had undergone plastic surgery. Shiho was once again forced to move several spaces forward, while Yuichi and Shibe only moved 1 and 2 spaces, respectively. The insults began to escalate, driving a wedge between the friends. The following round brought a shocking revelation. Yutori had once worked as a sugar baby. Overwhelmed, Yutori broke down as her painful past was dragged back into the spotlight. She immediately accused Shiho, the only one who knew about her secret, of betraying her. Shibe, in his usual clumsy manner, worsened the situation by making insensitive comments about Yutori's past, prompting Tenji to punch him in the face out of frustration. Tenji then asked Yuichi to comfort Yutori, knowing that only Yuichi had the ability to calm her down. After several rounds, the current standings were clear. Tenji remained at the back of the group. Manabu reminded everyone of the rules, but it was evident that the debts were no longer the main concern. The exposure of secrets had become the group's breaking point. Yutori shared her story. She had suffered severe bullying in the past. Teachers and classmates turned their backs on her, refusing to help. She had to pay off her bullies just to be left alone. Desperate for money, she decided to become a sugar baby for a wealthy older man. At first, it was just dinners and outings. However, things took a darker turn when the man asked her to cosplay and take photos. When he tried to make physical advances, she ran away, believing she had not crossed any lines. Although the internet didn't believe her, she desperately sought validation from Yuichi. She pleaded with him to believe in her, as she felt he was the only person she had left. If Yuichi abandoned her now, she would truly be alone. The supervisors believed that people are all the same. They thought that as long as they remained pure, they had the right to scold those deemed dirtier than themselves. In this case, everyone would believe that Yutori is dirty, that she is to blame. However, Yuichi was still willing to accept her past and would never abandon his friends. He whispered something to Yutori and asked her to trust him. The supervisors realized that if he could forgive like this, then his past must have been even worse than Yutori's. Yutori began to grow suspicious of Shiho and wanted to stay away from her. Shiho indeed knew about Yutori's past, but that was only because she had saved Yutori before, and Yutori had shared her story. Shiho hadn't listened too much, and she had never broken a promise to her friends. The supervisors observed that the traitor had succeeded in sowing discord because that person likely didn't care about money but was solely focused on dividing the group. That person was probably gloating now because they were the one who had stolen the 2 million yen from the class trip fund. From the flashback, we learned that the culprit is one of the friends, and when they stole from Shiho, they bumped into Yutori and were cut under the eye by her pen. This person is also the only one who knows that Shiho had undergone plastic surgery just to cover up a scar on her cheek. This same person was the one who revealed Yutori's secret, because they had given Shiho a keychain containing a listening device. The culprit is none other than Tenji, the one with the scar under his eye. Tenji did this to destroy Shiho's relationships so he could monopolize her for himself. Shiho wanted Tenji to believe that she wasn't the one who revealed his secret, and of course, Tenji believed her because he was the true culprit. Of the 5 secrets shared, the 3 most shocking were written by Tenji himself. Tenji had already broken Yutori's trust in Shiho, so now he just needed to reverse things. He later concluded that Shiho might have suspected that Yutori had betrayed her because Yutori could have revealed her own secret to make Shiho appear bad and then steal Yuichi from her, knowing that Yutori would not easily win Yuichi from Shiho. Tenji thought that Yuichi was a good person, easily swayed by sympathy. Manabu wanted them to continue the game, so Yuichi let Tenji go first. Tenji realized that he was now at the bottom and would be suspected if no one spoke ill of him, so he began to slander himself to maintain the group's trust. However, when he returned, Tenji saw that Yuichi had just slapped Shiho because she believed Yutori was the one who slandered herself to lure Yuichi. Tenji realized that his plan was even easier now that the 2 girls had broken trust with each other. Shiho thought that women weren't afraid to play dirty to get what they wanted, and Yutori even brought up her surgery to counter her. Shiho then explained her own surgery, and this caused Shibe to rejoin the competition for Shiho. The 2 girls no longer trusted each other, and Yuichi was forced to stay with Yutori, so Shiho no longer trusted him either. Tenji saw everything falling into place as he not only broke the relationship between Shiho and Yutori, but also shattered their trust in Yuichi. He took advantage of this moment to approach Shiho, who then rejected Yuichi and chose to stand by Tenji. Manabu wanted them to continue the game, and the remaining 4 entered the room. The result was that only 2 spoke ill of others, the first being insignificant, while the second was Tenji lying about his real age. He claimed that he was a year older than them, but due to an incident, he had to repeat a year and thus was now studying with them. This secret was known only to Shiho, who was now under suspicion. But Tenji did this to isolate Shiho, ensuring that she had no one left by her side and would have to rely on him. Shiho was forced to take more steps, but this round allowed her to choose someone to reveal a secret, and the audience would vote on whether they should forgive the person or not. If no one forgave, she would have to take 10 more steps. Tenji was worried because if Shiho chose him, he would be exposed by the organizers as the one who had dragged them into this. Since he was the closest to Shiho, she might choose him to test whether Tenji truly wanted to help her. But in a critical moment, Shibe stood up to take the blame, as he wanted to regain Shiho's trust. The game revealed that Shibe's father was a corrupt politician, involved in various political crimes such as womanizing, infidelity, embezzlement, and covering up some of his wrongdoings with money. The supervisor believed this would cause division because no parent would want their child to associate with the child of a criminal. Tenji saw an opportunity and decided to exploit it. Shiho wasn't calculating, as this was just her fault and Shibe shouldn't be responsible for it. Tenji approached and argued that Shibe couldn't be considered innocent because, as the game revealed, his father had used money to cover up many things. Therefore, it was likely that Shibe had committed crimes in the past and had been shielded by his father. He was completely isolated from the group and, with 99% of the audience voting against him, was forced to take 9 steps, standing right behind Shiho. Now, the next round came, and Tenji wanted to end things right there. After the next round, the only negative statement was that Shibe had killed someone. Tenji was stunned because he hadn't written anything for this round. He thought he had mixed things up enough and wanted to leave it like that to avoid suspicion. After observing, he realized that it was Yuichi who had written it. The supervisor noticed that the fun was just beginning now that Yuichi had stirred everything up once again. If one paid attention, it was Yuichi who had brought everything to this point. Shibe tried to explain that he had never killed anyone, and that was definitely a lie. Tenji was also certain, because someone like Shibe wouldn't have the courage to kill anyone, so Yuichi was certainly the one lying. Shibe wanted Manabu to punish the liar as per the rules, but this condition would only be met if he could prove his innocence. Anyone could claim something, but without evidence, it was meaningless. Shibe wanted to check his criminal record, but even if he had one, his father had likely taken care of it, so there was probably no record left. Manabu allowed the supervisors to decide, and even though Shibe begged, he foolishly said that if he had committed the crime, his father would have solved everything. This self-inflicted wound led to Shibe advancing 5 more steps. Yuichi said that he still trusted Shibe and began his own investigation. He revealed that the traitor had written all the slander from the beginning of the game until now. Yuichi tried to point out that someone in the group was lying but couldn't yet reveal the identity of the person, causing Tenji to think he was bluffing. However, Yuichi explained that this game was not really that difficult. Since the game was being watched by an audience, there couldn't be any debt squares where the debt would just accumulate. Because if that was the case, the organizers would always win. Even if the players reached the end, they would end up owing more than at the beginning, and that would no longer attract viewers. Moreover, since this was a Monopoly-like game, there were squares where players could clear their debt, as evidenced by the previous round when their debts were reduced. Therefore, if they all finished the game together, the debts and debt clearing would cancel each other out. The problem was that it was too late to realize this, but Yuichi came up with a way to balance everything. He suggested that, except for Shibe, who was leading, everyone should slander themselves in order to catch up with Shibe. If anyone broke the rules and slandered Shibe, they would be exposed because they wouldn't have a self-slander card. This way, they could stop hurting each other. However, Tenji disagreed and insisted that Yuichi reveal the identity of the traitor if he knew. That way, they could make the traitor move to the 3rd round alone. Tenji thought Yuichi was too soft and began to pressure him. But Yuichi was ready to face it. When the results were announced, there were 10 votes for slander. Since there was no limit on the number of votes, Yuichi's plan failed. At this point, Tenji forced him to reveal the traitor's identity. Yuichi helplessly confessed that he had made up the story about the traitor. Trust in Yuichi was broken, just as Tenji had predicted. Now, Tenji just needed to continue with his plan to get revenge on Shiho for taking the most important thing from him. The game continued until Shiho reached the final square. At this point, no matter what she did, she would advance 1 step closer to the final game. But the game was still not over, as the supervisor realized that Yuichi had become a dangerous player who had been manipulating the game all along without anyone noticing. Yuichi wanted everyone to work together to find the traitor. According to the rules, anyone who lied would be punished, so now, if all 5 of them wrote that they were the ones who registered to play the game, everyone would be punished, and they would endure together until the next round. The traitor would be left behind and sent home. Yuichi wanted Tenji to go first because he was the one Shiho trusted the most. Tenji knew he was about to be exposed, so he decided to do as Yuichi suggested and then cry and make excuses afterward. But when the results were announced, only Tenji had written anything, and the others left their papers blank. He planned to play the crying game, but Yuichi demanded that he confess everything first, with excuses to come later. Yuichi now looked very scary and different from the person they had once known. Yuichi began recounting everything he had set up since the second round of the game. He explained that when Tenji started slandering others, Yuichi and Shiho had secretly teamed up, using paper in the room to communicate. During the third round, Yuichi had left his ballot blank, but the camera had caught him holding a pen and taking 2 ballots. Afterward, he placed his hand on Shiho's shoulder, indicating that he had given her something. He wanted her to write down the secret that only the 2 of them knew in order to gain her trust. Yuichi had excluded others to identify the traitor. During Yutori's round, Yuichi had secretly given her a note, telling her that Shiho was on their side and they should pretend to argue to flush out the traitor. This was why, in the next round, Shiho revealed the only secret Yutori knew, and they managed to eliminate 2 people. Shibe was easy because he volunteered to reveal the truth, leaving only Tenji. To avoid Tenji going mad and disrupting everything, Yuichi decided to use the plan with the loophole to make Tenji wait until the game was nearly over before exposing him. However, Yuichi had also prevented the possibility of multiple votes against each other by keeping everyone's name tags. Since everyone wanted to prove they weren't the traitor, they would immediately present their tags. By using the name tags as hostages, everyone had no choice but to follow Yuichi's plan. The supervisor observed that Yuichi was very clever, able to manipulate people's psychology much like how religions do. Tenji wanted to know why Yuichi had excluded him but didn't choose to implicate him. Yuichi explained that Tenji had acted differently from usual. He, who was usually a peacemaker, had started arguing with Shibe, accusing him of slandering others. However, no one had shared any secrets with Shibe for a long time because he was known to be a gossip. Tenji admitted defeat, realizing that Yuichi had chosen someone as naive as Shibe to blame. Now, there was nothing he could do to clear things up for Shiho, so Yuichi decided to confess to Manabu that he had lied in order to take the punishment on behalf of Shiho and participate in the third round. They confirmed what Yuichi had said, allowing him to proceed alone. Yuichi revealed that he had lied about Shibe killing someone because he himself was the murderer. He had killed 3 people and had been called a monster by the supervisor. Yuichi decided to leave them behind and head into the next round, planning to take down Manabu and the game organizers. His friends didn't believe he could be a murderer, but Manabu confirmed that what he said was true. Everyone started arguing about Yuichi, and at that moment, Yuichi couldn't understand his mother's teachings that friends were more important than money. To him now, friends felt like a burden, and he decided he would go into the third round alone to protect them. But just as he was about to jump in, Tenji stepped forward, wanting to go with Yuichi to make amends. He confessed that he had also lied about having feelings for Shiho. He joined the game only to face Yuichi alone and prove himself by getting his first kiss. The organizers accepted this and allowed both of them to proceed to the next round. They also mentioned that Tenji must have some ulterior motive because this was the second time he had participated in the game. Years ago, Yuichi had been taught by his mother that the most important thing in the world was friends, not just money. Yuichi nodded in agreement with his mother's words. However, when leaving the hospital, Yuichi met his teacher, who told him that the most important thing in the world was actually money. Yuichi was suddenly awakened and found himself with Tenji in a cave. Yuichi asked where they were, but Tenji didn't know either. Suddenly, Manabu's voice echoed, informing them that they needed to stay in this cave for 3 days while the organizers prepared for the third game. They had only water to survive for the next 3 days. Tenji had to explain his recent actions by saying that he followed Yuichi because only by staying with him would he have a chance to explain everything, including why he betrayed him and all the other details. Tenji confessed that this was his second time participating in the friendship game. But before continuing, he signaled Yuichi to cover their name tags to avoid possible eavesdropping devices inside. Tenji shared that everything had started because of Shiho. She had taken the most valuable thing Tenji had in his life. Specifically, back in middle school, Tenji had two very close friends. The three of them had made plans together, and Tenji had told them that he had saved up a large sum of money and wanted to start a business with them before turning 18. His friends were surprised that Tenji wanted to share this money with them, but Tenji believed that as long as the three of them stuck together, nothing could stop them. A year later, Shiho transferred to their school, but Tenji's business with his friends was still going smoothly. One day, his two friends asked if he was dating Shiho. Tenji admitted that he and Shiho were just set up by their parents and were only friends. After that, the three of them began to manage their money more strictly, keeping the same amount of capital as when they entered high school. By the time they reached high school, the three of them decided to split the money and invest it. Whoever made the most money before turning 20 would become the president of their company. Things wouldn't have changed if his friends hadn't added another condition. The president would also have the right to confess to Shiho. Tenji felt that this could tear their friendship apart, but he went along with it, hoping to delay the rupture. Not long after, Tenji and his two friends were thrown into the friendship game because one of them owed 10 million yen. The three lost the game, and Tenji was burdened with a 20 million yen debt and sent home. Tenji was forbidden from speaking about the game. He went to confront one of his friends, who revealed that he had used the money to buy gifts for Shiho. However, he couldn't say anything more because he feared the game would eliminate him. Soon after, both of Tenji's friends moved away, and Shiho began to put more pressure on Tenji in his life. Tenji didn't know who to turn to for advice, so he decided to tell his father, the most important person to him. His father listened and understood his situation, deciding to handle things for Tenji from then on. However, that very day, Tenji received the tragic news that his father had passed away. The police concluded it was a suicide, but Tenji knew his father would never do such a thing. Before leaving the house, Tenji's father had mentioned that he was going to visit Shiho's family. Tenji suspected that everything he had been going through was connected to Shiho. From that point on, he started investigating Shiho more deeply, but he found nothing. To make matters worse, Tenji received an anonymous letter warning him to stop digging into Shiho's past or else he would disappear too. This led Tenji to drag everyone into the friendship game to expose Shiho's true nature. Although Yuichi had ruined his plan, Tenji at least began to suspect that Shiho could indeed be the traitor. Tenji knew Shiho was hiding something big. Their current debt was 10.8 million yen, but according to the information Yuichi gathered from others, the debt should have been 18.8 million yen. This meant someone had falsified the amount. Yuichi didn't know how Tenji got the information about the debt, but Tenji asked Manabu. When he asked Manabu again, Manabu confirmed it for him. Afterward, both of them recalculated the debts based on the information they had obtained earlier. Tenji then revealed to Yuichi the real debt amount he owed. They also recalculated the total debt of everyone after the second game and found it was still off by 4 million compared to the information Manabu had provided. Shiho's debt was unusually large, so it was clear that she had lied about her debt. Yuichi speculated that if Shiho had indeed lied, she must be a professional liar. However, Yuichi wasn't entirely convinced, as it was also possible that Tenji was lying. After the last game, Yuichi had realized that their group was nothing more than a bunch of strangers now. Even Tenji had no idea that Yuichi had once killed someone. But why was Tenji still following him? Tenji explained that he wanted revenge for his father and to destroy this game because Yuichi was the only one he trusted to succeed in doing so. To regain Yuichi's trust, Tenji willingly showed him his name tag and his debt amount. He immediately doubled his debt for breaking the rules. Tenji sincerely wanted to follow Yuichi, and he bowed his head and accepted being seen as nothing more than a tool by Yuichi. Yuichi said he needed 3 days to think things over. 2.5 days later, Yuichi asked Tenji if he had any relationships with Shibe or Yutori. Tenji replied that he considered them outsiders, but Yuichi reminded him that both were, after all, Tenji's friends. He wanted Tenji to apologize to Shibe and Yutori for involving them in this mess, and even if they didn't forgive him, Tenji had to apologize. If Tenji still felt guilty and remorseful, he should apologize. Tenji promised he would apologize, so Yuichi also promised to help Tenji through the third game. Half a day later, the two were released from the cave and stepped into a forest, where they met Manabu. Manabu informed them that the next game would be a game of hide and seek, and they would have to compete against a team of 5. Tenji didn't understand why they had to compete against another team, but Manabu explained that true friendship would only exist when there was an opponent. For example, if Tenji had a friend who was a scoundrel ready to betray him, and the opposing team was a group of 5 people in harmony, jealousy would arise, and trust in friends would disappear. They would have to fight through this mentality in this game. The key to overcoming this challenge was to trust friends, no matter the circumstances. Manabu then explained the game rules. One person would hide, and the rest of the team members would search for them. The team with fewer players would be at a disadvantage because of the previous conflict in Yuichi's team, making them vulnerable, while the opposing team would have an advantage due to their harmony. Manabu also introduced a rule allowing players to switch teams. The rule stated that a player could switch to the opposing team and transfer their remaining debt to the losing team. The player who switched could leave without any further debt. For Yuichi's team, if they switched sides, they would automatically lose. Manabu then gave Yuichi an option. There was one person who was left alone from another team, and Yuichi had the choice to accept them into his team. When Yuichi asked if it was a girl, Manabu confirmed it, so Yuichi accepted her into his team. Tenji was concerned about having a stranger join their team, but Yuichi argued that they couldn't win the game with only 2 people, so they had to accept. The girl, Maria, was accepted into Yuichi's team. She was an employee of the game supervision team, and they wanted to place her in their team to monitor Yuichi, since he had declared his intention to destroy the whole system. The supervisors wanted to see if Yuichi had any plans. Meanwhile, Tenji decided to be the one to hide, as he wanted Yuichi to be outside to supervise the situation and prevent Maria from switching sides. Manabu then gave both teams 2 hours to prepare their hiding spots. While looking for a place to hide, Tenji mentioned the game's rules. First, violence was prohibited to force the other team to reveal the hiding spot. Second, the person hiding had to stay in one place and couldn't move until the game ended. If they broke these rules, they would immediately lose, and their debt would double. Regarding what was allowed, they were provided with phones to communicate with each other, and there was also a supply camp for food in the middle of the forest. Since the hider could not go and get the supplies themselves, the seekers had to frequently bring food to the hider. However, the next rule stated that the hider was allowed to give up. Being the hider meant accepting complete loneliness, unable to go anywhere until their teammates found the opposing team's hider. If the hider couldn't endure the solitude any longer, they were given a button. Pressing the button meant the hider surrendered, resulting in an automatic loss for the entire team. Yuichi then found a hiding spot for Tenji. As a precaution, he stationed Maria far away from Tenji's hiding place. Tenji remained concerned about their chances of winning the game, but Yuichi believed that if both sides played fair, they would surely lose. However, if they played dirty, Yuichi was confident they would win. What Yuichi was most concerned about was Tenji's endurance. The longer Tenji could endure, the easier it would be for Yuichi to secure victory. Tenji expressed confidence in his ability to endure, so Yuichi promised not to let him down. As time ran out, Yuichi left, and 2 days later, he still hadn't come to check on Tenji. Tenji hadn't eaten since the game began and was now on the brink of dehydration, causing his mind to spiral into panic. He began to doubt Yuichi, thinking that perhaps Yuichi had abandoned him. However, if Yuichi had switched sides, Tenji would have already been found. He started to suspect that Yuichi might be torturing him as revenge for what happened in the second game. Tenji used his phone to call Yuichi, but to his surprise, someone from the opposing team picked up. They told Tenji that Yuichi intended to abandon him, just as Tenji had feared. For the past 2 days, Yuichi had supposedly been lounging at the supply camp, eating and playing without any intention of searching for Tenji. Despite these claims, Tenji still held onto some trust in Yuichi and hung up the phone, though his resolve was shaken. He descended into madness, desperately hoping that Yuichi would come soon. To understand what happened, the story rewinds to 2 days earlier, when the game had just begun, and we were introduced to the opposing team members. First was the hider and also their team leader. Next was a young man whom I'll refer to as Thug. Then there was another teammate, considered the master of seduction in their group, whom I'll call Heartbreaker. Following him was the youngest member of their team, and finally, a bespectacled young man, whom I'll refer to as Mr. Sirius. The 4 teammates devised a plan. Based on their understanding of the game, no matter how many players there were, it would be nearly impossible to find the hider in the vast forest. Therefore, the key to victory lay in ensuring that the Seekers successfully delivered food to the hider. They decided to station teammates to guard the supply camp. The team leader assigned Thug and Heartbreaker to monitor the camp while Mr. Sirius and the youngest member searched for a hiding spot for him. To strengthen their teamwork, the entire group performed a unity ritual. Even the 2 supervisors overseeing the game placed bets on which team would win. 3 days passed without much happening, but the opposing team's supervisor was confident that Tenji would soon press the button. The game, as the 5-member team had deduced, was not about finding the hider. Instead, it hinged on guarding the supply camp and waiting for the disadvantaged team to deliver food to their hider, then tailing them. The opposing team had 5 members, all of whom had previously played on the same sports team. Their physical stamina allowed them to monitor Yuichi and Maria constantly. They could also take turns guarding the supply camp and delivering food to their team leader. By keeping watch on Yuichi long enough, they believed Tenji would eventually press the button, ending the game. That night, the 2 supervisors discovered that Tenji had started hallucinating from hunger. He imagined Yuichi bringing food to him. Meanwhile, Yuichi had spent nearly 3 days sitting at the supply camp, eating and relaxing as if nothing was happening. However, the supervisors knew Yuichi was scheming something because Maria had reported to them that Yuichi was far more insane and frightening than they had thought. Yuichi then suddenly announced that he wanted to switch to the opposing team. The supervisors, aware of Yuichi's nature, knew that he treated men and women equally as tools for his plans. Everyone believed that if Yuichi switched sides, he would definitely devise a plan to sabotage the opposing team. However, if he did switch, Tenji would automatically lose and take on all the debt. Even though victory seemed certain, the other team still wanted to consult their leader before allowing Yuichi to join. Yuichi laughed at them because they couldn't make a simple decision on their own. Everything had to be run by the team leader. To Yuichi, this was just a team of people who only knew how to follow orders. Thug was enraged and wanted to punch Yuichi, but the others held him back, knowing that any violence would result in their immediate disqualification for breaking the rules. Thug calmed down, and the youngest team member went to fetch their leader. The blonde-haired supervisor thought they only needed to let Yuichi join their team to secure victory. However, when the youngest member returned, he refused Yuichi's request to join because they wanted to play it slow and steady. If Yuichi truly wanted to switch sides, Maria would have to switch with him, as they didn't want Yuichi learning the hiding spot of their leader and then reporting back to Maria. Thug provoked Yuichi, daring him and Maria to join their team. However, 2 days prior, Yuichi had already revealed his plan to Maria. He told her that on the 3rd day, he would pretend to switch sides. If successful, he would gather information about the enemy's hiding spot and pass it to her. If he failed, he would devise another plan. What Yuichi wanted to confirm, however, was whether Maria was willing to trust his strategy. Yuichi asked Maria something that left her truly exhilarated because she realized that Yuichi was far crazier than she had imagined. Yuichi eventually changed his mind and decided not to switch sides, not because his plan had been exposed, but because he had found another way to win. Earlier, he had said that during the 2 days he spent sitting at the supply camp, he would pretend to do nothing. In reality, he was there to provoke and gather information from the enemy team. The next morning, while the youngest member and Mr. Sirius delivered food, Thug and Heartbreaker stayed behind to guard the camp. Heartbreaker chatted with Thug for a while and then decided to leave to monitor Maria. Yuichi took the opportunity to sit up and talk to Thug. He began praising how well Thug's team worked together. However, Thug saw himself as a burden to his leader, as there were instances where he had caused injuries to him. Because of this, Thug trained relentlessly to improve himself. Yuichi then casually asked about who was responsible for the debt that dragged their team into this game. Heartbreaker returned just in time to switch places with Thug, preventing him from revealing anything. Thug went to monitor Maria, only to realize she had disappeared. He panicked, assuming Maria had gone to deliver food, and ran to find her. Instead, he stumbled upon Maria bathing nearby, which made him blush and retreat. As Thug returned to Yuichi's position, still flustered, Yuichi suddenly shouted a signal for Maria to move. Both of them then split up, forcing Thug and Heartbreaker to chase them in opposite directions. However, all 4 of them eventually converged on the same path and began chasing each other. Near the edge of a cliff, Yuichi suddenly pushed Maria off, shocking everyone watching, including Maria herself, who hadn't anticipated this move. Meanwhile, Tenji had completely broken down mentally and physically. He considered pressing the button but ultimately decided against it. Tenji realized he no longer wanted to betray anyone and chose to use his remaining strength to trust Yuichi. Just as Tenji's hope was fading, Yuichi arrived in time, saving Tenji as if he had returned him from the brink of death. After eating and regaining his strength, Tenji asked why Yuichi had taken so long to deliver food. Yuichi explained that he hadn't revealed the nature of the game to Tenji earlier because he wanted to test his resolve and trust. Now, Yuichi fully trusted Tenji and was happy that Tenji hadn't pressed the button, risking it all to trust him. Tenji now understood that things were much harder than he had imagined, but he still wondered if Yuichi was confident about winning. Yuichi believed that successfully delivering food to Tenji was proof that his plan was already halfway complete. Meanwhile, Maria had been saved by 2 members of the opposing team. She realized that Yuichi had been using her as bait to lure the enemy. Maria couldn't have anticipated that Yuichi would push her into danger just to ensure the 2 opposing team members would focus entirely on her. If Thug hadn't reached out to grab her, she would have actually fallen off the cliff. Heartbreaker wanted to chase after Yuichi, but Thug knew he couldn't lift Maria alone, so he stayed to help. Although the plan wasn't perfect, Yuichi had at least managed to stall the enemy team while he thought of his next move. Tenji considered Yuichi's actions reckless, but Yuichi explained that he already knew if one person stayed, the other would as well. Yuichi hadn't spent the past 3 days simply exhausting Tenji's strength. He had been observing the enemy team's personalities and relationships. The person Yuichi had identified as the most compassionate was Thug. Despite his rough, hot-headed nature, Thug was the kindest member with significant guilt from his past. He also cared deeply for women, so Yuichi was certain he would stop to save Maria. Yuichi also believed Heartbreaker would stay with Thug because he noticed Heartbreaker always paired up with Thug, reacting to his every move. Heartbreaker was talented in many areas but didn't excel in any one thing, leading to a somewhat artificial personality that naturally followed the lead of someone more straightforward like Thug. With the food delivery complete, Yuichi now had more time to act. He decided to destroy the friendships within the enemy team. Yuichi had already planted the seed of discord, and that seed was Maria. When they returned to camp, Thug began to lose his temper and yelled at Heartbreaker. Thug then decided to switch to Yuichi's team to protect Maria. Earlier, after saving Maria from the cliff, she had thanked Heartbreaker because she was still mad at Thug for peeking at her. Panicked, Thug apologized, but Maria smiled, forgave him, and acknowledged that she owed him her life. The other two team members didn't understand Yuichi's actions. Maria, however, defended Yuichi, which made Thug suspicious. He noticed Maria was limping and bent down to carry her on his back. On the way back to the supply camp, Maria praised Thug for being kind and lamented that fate had placed her on Yuichi's team. When the two team members who had gone to deliver food returned, they heard what happened and decided not to blame Thug. Instead, they opted to play long-term against Yuichi. At this point, Yuichi returned to the supply camp and sternly called Maria over to sit next to him. He declared that if the opposing team wanted to play long-term, he would play with them. Thug demanded that Yuichi let Maria go because of what he had just done. However, Yuichi asserted his dominance, showing he was a tyrant who could do whatever he wanted with his teammates. Enraged, Thug wanted to beat Yuichi up, but Maria stopped him, saying this was exactly what Yuichi wanted. Yuichi grabbed Maria by the hair, pretending to be violent, which led the opposing team to protest to the game overseer, Manabu. However, Manabu explained that the rules only prohibited violence against opponents, not teammates. Frustrated, Thug decided he would switch to Yuichi's team to protect Maria. Heartbreaker, however, sensed something was off and suspected this was one of Yuichi's tricks. Yuichi acknowledged that Heartbreaker had decent experience with women, but Thug still believed Maria's abuse was real. Tensions rose between Heartbreaker and Thug, with Heartbreaker taunting Thug for being inexperienced with women. This led to a scuffle between the two, forcing the youngest member to step in and break up the fight. The youngest suggested calling the team leader for a decision. At this point, Yuichi mocked Thug for being too cowardly to act on his own, even when it came to protecting a girl, and for relying on the team leader's decisions. Provoked, Thug decided to speak with the leader himself. The youngest team member accompanied him to meet the team leader and discuss the situation. Yuichi had already planned for this. He understood that the team leader was the linchpin holding the team together. If the leader was absent, it would be much easier for discord to erupt between Heartbreaker and Thug. Yuichi had anticipated that Thug would persuade Maria to switch sides, but she would claim that she was being threatened by Yuichi. In the easiest scenario, Thug would lose control and punch Yuichi, thus breaking the rules. If not, Yuichi would gradually pull Thug into his team. A few hours later, Thug and the youngest returned, and Thug now decided to switch to Yuichi's team. Naturally, Yuichi agreed immediately since the team leader had refused to allow Maria to switch to their team. Thug was willing to incur more debt, but had no intention of cooperating with Yuichi. Thug believed that now he had the right to punch Yuichi without holding back. However, Yuichi was not the type to be bullied by someone like Thug. He quickly restrained and tied Thug up so that he couldn't resort to violence. That night, Yuichi informed Tenji that he had successfully lured one of the enemy members to switch sides. Now, all he needed was to force Thug to reveal the team leader's location. At this point, Thug felt ashamed for trying to help Maria but ending up in this humiliating situation. Maria worried about Thug because she knew Yuichi would torture him for information. However, Thug assured her he could endure it, and even if Yuichi did torture him, it would be useless because he didn't know the team leader's location. Yuichi was shocked. He confronted Thug about how he had supposedly gone with the youngest to see the team leader. On the way back earlier, the youngest had only claimed to call the team leader after realizing Yuichi was up to something, and then he and Thug had returned. It was at this moment that Yuichi realized the truth. The youngest was actually the team leader and the mastermind of their team. Yuichi felt relieved that he had discovered this sooner rather than later, but the youngest told Yuichi it was already too late. By accepting Thug into his team, Yuichi had essentially invited a time bomb into his midst. The youngest declared that he would soon end this battle and hoped Yuichi would soon understand why Thug was a bomb. The youngest then said farewell to the team leader and set off to find Tenji. At this point, the two overseers revealed that the youngest was a childhood genius whose weakness was boredom. That was the reason he had joined this game, to find some excitement. He was able to manipulate the team leader because he had discovered some dark secret about him. Yuichi now realized why Thug was a bomb. If Thug attacked his former teammates, Yuichi's team would break the rules and lose. Keeping Thug tied up meant Yuichi had to supervise him the entire time, leaving him unable to track the enemy team's movements. However, both the straight-laced guy and Heartbreaker took the initiative to find Yuichi and supervise him as well. The group sat and waited until morning. Maria left for a while and happened to encounter the youngest. The youngest quickly deduced that Maria was part of the management team. He attempted to convince Maria to betray Yuichi. His reasoning was that while Yuichi and Tenji looked exhausted after 3 days of imprisonment, Maria looked suspiciously clean without a single speck of dirt on her. However, Maria refused to betray Yuichi because she needed to maintain her image as a cute and innocent girl. The youngest then asked her if she wanted to see Yuichi, the arrogant strategist, completely helpless and defeated. Maria admitted she did, so she called Yuichi, pretending to ask for Tenji's location while unsupervised. Yuichi told her where Tenji was, and Maria immediately reported back to the youngest. Yuichi was furious upon realizing he had been betrayed. The enemy team then set out to find Tenji. The youngest called Tenji, urging him to cut ties with Yuichi as soon as possible. However, Tenji continued to trust Yuichi. Shortly after, the youngest successfully located Tenji. Manabu then announced that the game had ended and ordered everyone in the forest to gather at the supply camp. Manabu officially declared the winner of the hide and seek game to be Yuichi's team. The youngest was shocked and couldn't understand why. He had found Tenji first, but apparently that wasn't the only way to win. The reason was that the team leader had pressed the forfeit button. Before the game ended, Yuichi had pretended to be furious to lure the entire enemy team away, leaving him alone with Thug. Yuichi admitted that he hadn't wanted to win the game this way. Yuichi then called the team leader and demanded that he press the forfeit button. Otherwise, Yuichi would punch Thug until the leader complied. Yuichi punched repeatedly, but the team leader was confused as to why Thug wasn't saying anything. Yuichi handed the phone to Thug, who told the leader not to give up. Thug was extremely tough and could endure any amount of beating, so Yuichi decided to escalate the situation. Yuichi had heard that they were once on the same basketball team and that Thug had once made a bad throw, causing the team leader to get injured. So, Yuichi threatened to break each of Thug's fingers until the team leader pressed the button. He began counting down from 10, and then a snap was heard. For someone who had suffered an injury before, the leader definitely didn't mistake that sound. He began crying, begging Yuichi to stop. But Yuichi insisted he would continue breaking fingers until the forfeit button was pressed. Yuichi also revealed that he knew it was the team leader who had caused the group's debt and forced them into this game. The leader apologized to the team, explaining that his family had gone into debt due to their failed business, which forced him to drop out of school. However, because he still wanted to play in the final tournament with the team, the youngest convinced him to join this game and act as the group's leader. Even though they had lost, the team leader still wanted to beat Yuichi up to avenge Thug. But Thug stopped him, revealing that his fingers were never broken at all. Yuichi had broken his own fingers to trick the leader. The youngest, unwilling to accept defeat, began blaming the team leader and Thug. However, the straight-laced guy grabbed the youngest and smacked him on the butt as punishment. As the big brother figure, he was the only one who could control the youngest. The straight-laced guy stated that if the team leader was willing to put Thug in danger just to win, the team would no longer respect him. The group then moved on, and the team leader promised to take responsibility for the debt if they lost. Even if he could no longer play basketball with them, he was satisfied because this game had already replaced the final match he had wanted so badly. Later, Yuichi also revealed that he had known Maria was with the management team all along. That's why he had no hesitation in pushing her off the cliff. He wasn't worried about her safety. His dramatic display after Maria's betrayal had been to ensure the opposing team would let their guard down and leave. Yuichi was then helped up by Tenji. Tenji admitted that although Yuichi had used underhanded tactics, he still hadn't destroyed the friendship among their opponents. However, Tenji noted that if the team leader had pressed the button any later, Yuichi might have actually broken Thug's fingers for real. Manabu then dismissed both Yuichi and Tenji, instructing them to leave as the organization prepared for the fourth game. The two were forbidden from revealing any details about the game, otherwise they would face severe consequences. After leaving, Yuichi and Tenji decided to look for Shiho. However, when they arrived at school, they encountered Yutori. She was overjoyed to see them back, but also informed them that Shiho had run away. Yuichi suspected that Shiho fled because she knew they had discovered her lie about the debt. Yutori then explained further. The day after the group returned from the second game, Shiho, Yutori, and Shibe had gone to school as usual. However, the class had confronted Shiho, suspecting her of stealing the camping trip money. While all other classes kept their money in bank accounts, Shiho had insisted on keeping the cash herself. Shibe wanted to reveal that Tenji was actually the one who had stolen the money, but doing so would break the rule about revealing information from the game. So Shibe kept quiet. Since everyone believed Shibe was Shiho's accomplice, he offered to repay the class. 2 days later, Shibe's father was arrested because someone had leaked information about his scandals, which had been exposed during the second game. Yuichi suspected that Shibe had confessed to his father about the game to ask for 2 million yen, which ultimately led to his father's arrest. The next day, Shibe apologized to everyone for being unable to repay the money, which resulted in him being bullied. Shiho had tried to protect Shibe, but both of them ended up having to drop out of school. Suddenly, a classmate ran to Yuichi and Tenji, telling them that something had happened to Shibe. At Shibe's house, his father had been murdered, and Shibe was found covered in blood and taken into police custody. When Shibe saw Yuichi and Tenji, he desperately tried to explain that he hadn't done anything. Tenji wanted to defend Shibe, but Yuichi stopped him, warning that he might accidentally reveal information about the game. Tenji later encountered Shiho's father escorting Shibe away, which confirmed his suspicion that the man was somehow involved in the game. However, Yuichi stopped him from saying anything, and Shiho's father advised both of them not to meddle. Yuichi, unfazed, declared that since he had no one important in his life, they could direct all their threats at him instead. Yutori then approached to talk to the two of them, but Yuichi harshly accused her of treating him like a monster after learning the truth about him. He criticized her for now pretending to care when she had been a burden to the group since the very beginning of the game, incapable of making decisions on her own. That night, as Yuichi returned home, he reflected that his harsh words were meant to push Yutori away from the situation for her own safety. He didn't want her to get hurt. However, he suddenly received a call from an unknown number. The caller revealed that they had kidnapped Yutori and demanded Yuichi participate in their game. If Yuichi showed up, he would be tortured brutally, but if he refused, Yutori would be tortured instead, albeit less severely. The caller also warned Yuichi not to bring anyone along, or Yutori would face the consequences. Yuichi coldly warned them not to lay a hand on Yutori. Otherwise, he would kill them all. He then went to the designated meeting point alone. There, he found a gang of thugs holding Yutori captive and a man wearing a Manabu mask who introduced himself as Kuroki. Yuichi demanded that they release Yutori first, but Kuroki showed him that he was in control. Kuroki threatened to reveal Yuichi's secret, which would make him reconsider saving Yutori. Reluctantly, Yuichi agreed to Kuroki's rules. Kuroki explained the game. Yuichi would have to endure 3 rounds of physical torment. However, Yutori could choose to take the punishment in his place. If Yutori accepted, her punishment would be less severe than Yuichi's. But if Yuichi objected or spoke out, both of them would suffer the punishment. In other words, Yutori was the one who had to choose. In the first round, they would be punched by a large thug. If Yutori accepted, she would receive 1 punch, while Yuichi would receive 3. If Yutori refused to decide, Yuichi would automatically take the punishment. Hesitant, Yutori struggled to choose, but Yuichi signaled her that he would take it. Kuroki ordered Yuichi not to move but decided to be generous and let him take all 3 punches alone. Yuichi endured the punches without flinching, thinking they were nothing compared to the blows he had taken from the team leader earlier. Yutori promised to take the punishment for the second round. Kuroki immediately grabbed her hand and forced her onto the table, declaring that she would have to endure having a fingernail ripped off. Blood started to flow as she panicked and began to feel the pain. Seeing this, Yuichi quickly volunteered to take her place. Kuroki grinned and increased the punishment to 3 fingernails. Yuichi urged him to hurry up, and Kuroki cruelly ripped off 3 of his nails without hesitation. Yuichi, now injured, wondered why the group would let a sick, twisted man like Kuroki lead them. Kuroki arrogantly declared that he was the smartest, the bravest, and the one who would never betray his friends. For the final round, Kuroki offered 2 options. Yutori would have to jump without wearing any clothes, or Yuichi would be stabbed 3 times in the hand with a knife. They had 1 minute to decide. Although Yutori was terrified, she said she would follow whatever choice Yuichi made. Without hesitation, Yuichi chose to take the punishment himself, which made Yutori feel even more guilty. Kuroki stabbed Yuichi's hand 3 times, and the 2 were finally allowed to leave. However, Yuichi declared he wasn't done yet. He wanted to keep playing. He reassured Yutori that she shouldn't feel guilty because she was the victim. The gang had targeted her just to get at him. Yutori, no longer afraid of Yuichi despite his past, stayed by his side and bandaged his hand. Yuichi warned her that if she didn't leave now, she might have to witness something terrifying. Nevertheless, Yutori chose to stay with him. Yuichi then challenged Kuroki to a game. He offered Kuroki 10 million yen if he played along, adding that if Kuroki knew Yuichi's past, he would know Yuichi had far more than 10 million yen at his disposal. Intrigued, Kuroki accepted. The game was simple: rock, paper, scissors. If Kuroki won, Yuichi would pay him 10 million yen. If Kuroki lost, he would have to sacrifice fingers corresponding to his choice. Scissors would cost him 2 fingers, paper would cost him the whole hand, and rock would cost him nothing. With Yuichi's injured hand, he would only be able to play rock or paper, giving Kuroki a significant advantage. To Kuroki, the game seemed like an incredibly favorable deal. If Kuroki accepted the game, Yuichi promised to give his subordinates additional money as a reward. The gang members cheered, urging Kuroki to participate. Unable to back down and appear cowardly, Kuroki reasoned that if he chose paper, he would either win or tie. To confirm, he asked Yuichi what would happen in the case of a tie. Yuichi calmly responded that nothing would happen. However, if Kuroki chose scissors, the odds would be 50-50, and he didn't want to risk losing 2 fingers. Yuichi, sensing Kuroki's plan to play paper, reminded him that he also wouldn't choose paper and then pushed Kuroki to begin. On the first round, both chose rock. In the second round, Yuichi switched tactics and chose scissors using his other, uninjured hand to make the move. Kuroki, caught off guard, lost. Angrily, he began to argue, but Yuichi pointed out that while he had promised not to choose paper, he never said he would play with only 1 hand. Frustrated, Kuroki attempted to cancel the bet and ordered his subordinates to attack Yuichi. However, just at that moment, Tenji arrived with the real game organizers. The organizers quickly apprehended Kuroki and his gang for impersonating them. The supervisor for Yuichi's team insisted on taking Kuroki away for punishment. Yuichi, however, requested to collect 5 fingers from Kuroki before they took him. When Kuroki refused, the supervisor forcibly held Kuroki's hand down, allowing Yuichi to act. Kuroki began screaming in terror. So Yuichi offered him a choice. He could pick one of his subordinates to take the punishment instead. The subordinate would only lose one finger. Kuroki cried out, pleading for one of his underlings to step forward. Yet none of them dared to volunteer. Overwhelmed, Yuichi finally collapsed from blood loss. Seeing this, the supervisor ordered Kuroki to be taken away, remarking that Yuichi had outsmarted him from the beginning. She noted that Yuichi had deliberately chosen scissors with his injured hand to trick Kuroki. By distracting Kuroki and making him focus on avoiding a tie, Yuichi successfully outplayed him. Not only that, but through this one game, Yuichi also destroyed the trust between Kuroki and his subordinates. Yuichi was then rushed away for medical treatment. Meanwhile, Maria informed Tenji that in the next game, they would have a choice: save Shibe or gain 500 million yen in additional debt. This debt was incurred after Shibe's father passed away, leaving him in financial ruin. When Yuichi regained consciousness, he declared his intention to save Shibe and expose the game for what it was, stating that money held no importance to him. He was then taken for emergency care, leaving Tenji and Yutori to decide to give their all in order to rescue Shibe. Thus, part 1 of the story came to an end.